This right here is the Prodigy V2 by Ride1Up. It is their premier commuter style e-bike. And this thing is one of the coolest commuter bikes that you can find. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about taking this commuter style bike and turning it into the ultimate trail shredding machine. So on today's video, we're going to be taking this perfectly good commuter style e-bike apart and putting on some awesome mountain bike parts to see if this thing can actually go from commuter e-bike to E-MTB. Before we do that, let's go over what you get with the Prodigy V2 and what parts I'm going to be changing out and upgrading on this bike. So as for the Prodigy V2, when it comes stock, here are some of the things that you can expect right out of the box. First off, this is the chain drive version. You can also get a CVT belt drive version. And the price on this chain drive version is going to cost you right around $2,300. But if you want to pick up the CVT version, you can expect to pay right around $2,700. Now, first and foremost, the biggest and most important part on an e-bike is the motor. And this comes with an awesome mid-drive Bros motor that puts out 90 Newton meters of torque. And being that this is a mid-drive motor, that should make it perfect for an E-MTB. Now, one of the major upgrades on the version 2 versus the version 1 is this front air suspension. That's right, they actually put on a full air suspension that gives you 100 millimeters of travel. For a commuter, that is super rare. And let's not forget the battery. This has a 36 volt, 14 amp hour battery. That should get you a lot of range, whether you're commuting or riding this as an E-MTB. Now, one of my favorite upgrades on this bike compared to the version 1 is the tires. This comes with much wider, more mountain bike specific style tires. These are Maxxis Recon Race, and these are 27 by 2.25 inches wide. These should be perfect whether you're riding on the road or hitting up the trail. Now, when it comes to shifting, this has one of the nicest setups you can get for a commuter. This is going to be a micro shift advent setup. It's a 9-speed setup. Unfortunately, there is no clutch built into this derailleur because honestly, on a commuter, you just don't need one. But for a mountain bike, that's something that we're going to have to think about. And tying into that rear derailleur is a microshift advent trigger shifter. Now, one of the most important parts on any bike are the brakes. Ride1Up didn't skimp at all on this. They stuck with the Tektro 4-piston hydraulic brakes. These are mountain bike style brakes that they put on a commuter. So this is a perfect tie-in to be an E-MTB. Now, since it's a commuter, they did install some metal fenders and a rear rack. But those are things just like the headlight and taillight that we're gonna have to remove to make this an actual mountain bike. So let's not waste any more time. Let's start disassembling this and go over the parts that I'm gonna install on this because I think this bike is gonna blow you away. So let's go ahead and take a look at all the parts that I'm gonna be putting on the Prodigy V2 XC Edition. First up, and I think the most obvious and least expensive upgrade you can do is new bars and stem. I went with the full send Fun bars that I had on a previous bike and also the Fun Equalizer stem. This is going to give me 780 millimeters of width on a 35 millimeter bar. These are super beefy. And this stem has me a little bit concerned because this is a 35 millimeter length stem. I'm wondering how this 35 millimeter length stem is going to feel on the Prodigy V2. Now, something that I think has to be really upgraded on the bike is the drivetrain. At least the rear derailleur. But I went ahead and dug through my parts bin and found a setup that's gonna be absolutely awesome. And I'm gonna start off with the 12-speed Shimano SLX shifter. That's right, I'm upgrading this bike from a 9-speed all the way up to a modern 12-speed. And to go along with that shifter, I have an XT rear derailleur. This is a super high-end, lightweight, fast-shifting rear derailleur that has a clutch built in. If you don't want that chain bouncing around and making your bike sound like it's falling apart going down the trail, you're definitely gonna need a clutch, and the XT rear derailleur has that built in. And to go with the shifter and the rear derailleur, I've got a Sunrace 12-speed cassette that runs on an HG hub. This should fit absolutely perfectly, but we're gonna have to see. And to go along with that cassette and the drivetrain, I've got a KMC 12-speed chain. And the chain ring on this bike has to change because this looks like a commuter setup and we want something that's going to look more mountain bike like. This is a narrow wide 34 tooth chain ring that should fit absolutely perfect Because this has the 104 BCD setup on it, that means that these bolts right here will line up perfect with the setup that's already on the bike. Now, I wanted to go completely crazy with this. I could have used the air fork that's on there and stuck with the 27.5 wheel. However, that wheel only has a quick release on it. So I happen to have from a previous build this RockShox Sid Select Plus 29er fork. This is gonna have a boost through axle, and it also has 120 millimeters of travel with a lockout that mounts to your handlebars. But I did say that this is 29. I thought a mullet setup would be awesome. And I happen to have this extra rim sitting around from a previous build that I did on one of my Marin bikes. This thing will be absolutely perfect. It's 29 inches and has through axles with boost spacing. And I didn't want to just slap on any old tire. I wanted a matching set of tires. So I went ahead and picked up a Maxxis Recon Race, but this one is going to be a 29 by 2.35. So the front wheel on this is going to be 0.10 bigger than the back wheel. But I think that's going to be ideal because this is going to make it super grippy on the front and super rowdy in the back. I think that's everything, but there may be a few extra things that I throw in along the way. But let's go ahead and let's start this upgrade process. So the first thing that you can do to make this more of a mountain bike without having to do any upgrades is remove these fenders and this rear rack. Let's go ahead and get that done first. Now, something that I totally didn't even think about, I'm gonna have to open up this motor and get access to where all of the cabling goes in for the lights. I wanna take off all the lights that are built into this bike, and I'm also gonna remove the shift sensor, which every time you shift with this bike, it cuts off the motor. This will help prevent any type of wear and tear on the drivetrain, but really, honestly, anytime you're mountain biking, you don't want that delay. So I'm gonna take that off while I'm taking off the lights. Now, removing the casing from the motor can look really intimidating, but honestly, this is actually a pretty simple process, and all the wiring seems to be organized relatively well. Just remember where you unplug the wire in case you need to plug it back in. Now, once I got the rear fender off, I knew I was going to remove the fork, so there was no need to actually remove the fender from the front fork. So I went ahead and removed the bars, the stem, the grips, all this stuff off the front end. I quickly got deeper into this project than what I expected. But the next thing I knew, I had this thing fully stripped down and almost ready to be upgraded. The internal routing for the cabling on this is a little bit difficult, if I'm quite honest with you. So if you're not experienced doing this, it can be pretty intimidating. But if you do have experience running internal cabling, you probably know you've got to take your time and just be patient with it. Now that I got the cabling ran for the rear derailleur, let's go ahead and take off the front chainring and chainring guard, and then we can take off the rear derailleur. All right, so I got the Prodigy V2 pretty much fully stripped down. I had to take it down a little bit further than what I was planning on or what I thought I was gonna have to do, but now I can go ahead and start putting on all the new parts. Let's go ahead and let's get to it. All right, day two, and we're back on the build of the Ride1Up Prodigy V2 into an E-MTB. Let's go ahead and let's get started. Now we're getting to the fun parts. We're installing the new front fork. Remember, this is a RockShox Sid Select Plus. This is a super plush XC style fork. Getting this installed is really going to start bringing this bike fully together. The steps of installing all the components on the bars is one of my favorite things to do whenever I do any type of bike build. It fully transforms the bike and really brings it all together. Now the original wheel set had a 6-bolt setup on the rotor, but I have center lock on this new wheel set. So I had to buy a 6-bolt to center lock adapter, and I got it in this awesome oil slick design. Day 3, let's get going on this build. Getting the brand new Recon Race tire installed on this front rim was an absolute breeze. This thing just needed a tube to be thrown into it, popped on the rim, and then aired up. Then I was able to install it and move on to the next step. Now the cassette on this looks absolutely massive on a 27.5 wheel. Remember, this is an 11 tooth all the way up to a 51 tooth. It's practically the size of a small pizza. All right, I got the front and the back wheel put on. This mullet setup looks absolutely insane. The front wheel is massive compared to the back wheel. This is getting kind of crazy. Let's go ahead, let's throw on the chain. We are super close to being able to test ride this. It's not quite yet dialed in, but we're getting there. So here it is, finally fully complete, the Ride1Up E-MTB Prodigy V2. This was such a fun project. I hope that this thing rides on the trail as good as it looks. So I have a couple of different trail systems in my area, and I was super excited to take it to one particular trail. However, that trail was not suited to be ridden at this time. We've had a ton of rain in the area, so I had to take it over to another trail, which is actually a lot more rough than the one that I was originally going to take it to. They're both XC style, but I would say this particular trail, Two Rivers Bike Park, edges on the verge of being in between XC and trail style riding. So this trail is gonna push this bike to its absolute limits. And I gotta say, I'm a little nervous to be riding this out here for the very first ride. Right out of the gate, I hit up the brand new climb trail that they just put in. This will allow me to feel out this bike and actually be able to determine whether or not this thing is gonna be a good E-MTB right out of the gate. Now the Bros motor on this bike, as you guys know, has 90 Newton meters of torque. That's a massive amount of torque. Actually, that's 5 more Newton meters than what you can expect out of a Shimano EP6 motor. And of course, this thing climbs like an absolute champ. Now the question is how is this gonna feel across some awesome single track? Well, I shredded across the entire park, winding up with close to 12 miles on my total ride. And let me tell you, this bike came across as a completely capable bike. However, there are definitely some downfalls converting over from a commuter style bike to an E-MTB. First off, the mullet setup was absolutely wild. The front actually performed like any other 29er, stomping over anything that got in its way. And the back wheel being 27.5 made this bike super nimble, but also made it a little bit wild at times. Now with zero surprise, the Shimano drivetrain that I installed on this worked absolutely flawlessly. So regardless of whether you're going to keep this as a commuter bike or you're going to convert yours into an E-MTB, you can definitely upgrade from that 9-speed all the way up to a modern 12-speed. One of the things that I was super concerned with whenever I started this project was the reach on this bike when putting a 35mm stem and 780mm bars on it. But honestly, at 5'11" with a 32-inch inseam, this bike fit really, really well. Now, if I was a little bit taller, say 6'1", it may be a little bit too small, but I think this bike converted into an E-MTB is ideal for someone who is right around 5'8" to 5'10". Well, there you go. The Prodigy V2 successfully converted over to an E-MTB. The question is this option really viable? Where in today's market, you can get into some really nice hardtail e-mountain bikes for right around $2,600. Now, there's one major flaw in this entire setup that would stop me from personally using this as a primary e-mountain bike. And that one thing is the rear axle. This is a threaded solid axle. Instead of it being a through axle or even just a simple quick release that's been around for a long time, Ride1Up chose to go with a threaded axle. I'm not really sure if that has to do with the CVT version of drive that you can get on this, and they wanted to use one frame across the board. But generally, whenever we see a mid-drive bike, we at least see a quick release on the back. Now, one last thing that makes this a little bit harder of an argument to be an E-MTB in 2024 is the fact that you could not internally route a dropper post on this. I looked at this thing at every angle with the motor out and everything, and there's just not a viable solution to be able to run an internal cable. Now, to wrap this up, guys, I'm definitely going to be giving this bike another chance. I want to get this thing out to the true XC trail in my area, Fellows Lake, because I think that this bike would be ideal for that area. But as of right now, I think the V2 is definitely best as a commuter. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And also, if Ride1Up, you're watching this, I'm really hoping that you guys have some really good plans for a future E-MTB. All right, guys, if you want to pick up a Prodigy V2, no matter which version it is, go ahead and use my links down below. That helps out this channel and it's no additional cost to you. That keeps this type of content coming through the pipeline. And then also, if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe, hit that like button. But as always, get out there and ride your bike.